Section 31 of The House of the White Shadows. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The House of the White Shadows by B.L. Farjeon. Section 31. Book 7, Chapter 2. Chapter 2. A Terrible Revelation. Without requesting permission, John Vanbrugh filled his glass with wine, which he drank leisurely with his eyes fixed on the Advocate's pale face the while. When he spoke, it did not escape the Advocate that he seemed to fling aside the flippancy of manner which had hitherto characterized him, and that his voice was unusually earnest. "I do not ask you to excuse me," he said, "for recalling the memory of a time when you did not despise my companionship. It is necessary for my purpose. We were, indeed, more than companions, we were friends. What it was that made you consort with me is just now a mystery to me. The contrast in our characters may have tempted you. I, a careless, light-hearted fellow who loved to enjoy the hours; you, a serious, cold-hearted student, dreaming, perhaps, of the position you have attained. It may be that you deliberately made a study of me to see what use you could make of my weakness. However it was, I lived in the present, you in the future. The case is now reversed, and it is I who live in the future. I have said you were cold-hearted, and I do not suppose you will trouble yourself to deny it. Such as you are formed to rise, while we impulsive, reckless devils are pretty sure to tumble in the mud. But I never had such a fall as you are threatened with, and scapegrace, vagabond as I am thankful not to have on my conscience what you have on yours. Now for certain facts. I mistake. I never contemplated. I settled to go on a tour for a few weeks, and scramble through bits of France, Switzerland, and Italy. You will remember my mentioning it to you. Yes, I see in your face that you are following me, and I shall feel obliged by your correcting me if in my statement of facts I should happen to trip. The story I am telling needs no effort of the imagination to embellish it. It is in its bare aspect sufficiently ghastly and cruel. When I was about to start on my tour, you, of your own accord, offered to accompany me. You had been studying too hard, and a wise doctor recommended you to rest for a while if you did not care to have brain fever, and also recommended you to seek new scenes in the company of a cheerful friend whose light spirits would be a good medicine for an overworked brain. You took the doctor's advice, and you did me the honour to choose me for a companion. So we started on our little tour of pleasure. To shorten what I have to say, I will not dwell upon the details of our jaunt, but I fix myself, with you, at Zermatt, where we stayed for 3 weeks. The attraction, what was it? The green valleys, the grandeur of the scenery? No, a woman. More correctly speaking, 2 women. Young, lovely, inexperienced, innocent. Daughters of a peasant, whose cottage door was always open to us, and who was by no means unwilling to receive small presents of money from liberal gentlemen like ourselves. Again I slip details. The story becomes trite. We captivated the hearts of the simple peasant maidens, and amused ourselves with them. In me that was natural, it was my way. But in you this circumstance was something to be astonished at. For just as long as you remained at Zermatt you were a transformed being. I don't think, until that time, I had ever heard you laugh heartily. Well, suddenly you disappeared. Getting up one morning, I found that my friend had deserted me. It was shabby behaviour at the best. However, it did not seriously trouble me. Every man has his own master, and I think we were beginning to tire a little of each other. It was awkward, though, to be asked by one of our pretty peasant friends where my handsome friend had gone, and when he would return, and not be able to give a sensible answer. This girl, who had been in your presence always bright and joyous and happy, grew sad and quiet and anxious-looking in your absence, and appeared to have a secret on her mind that was making her wretched. I stayed on at Zermatt for another month, and then I bade good-bye to my sweetheart, promising to come again in a year. I kept my promise, but when I asked for her in Zermatt, I heard that she was dead, and that her sister and father had left the village, and had gone no one knew whither. It will be as well for me here to remind you that during our stay in Zermatt we gave no home address, and that no one knew where we came from or where we lived. So prudent were we that we acted as if we were ashamed of our names. 3 years afterwards, in another part of Switzerland, I met the woman to whom you had made love. She had lost her father, but was not without a companion. She had a little daughter, your child." "A lie!" said the Advocate, with difficulty controlling himself. "A monstrous fabrication." "A solemn truth," replied Vanbrugh, "verified by the mother's oath and the certificate of birth. To dispute it will be a waste of breath and time. Hear me to the end. The mother had but one anxiety, to forget you and your treachery, and to be able to live so that her shame should be concealed. To accomplish this it was necessary that she should live among strangers, and it was for this reason she had left her native village. She asked me about you, and I played your game. I told her you had gone to a distant part of the world, and that I knew nothing of you. We were still friends, you and I, although our friendship was cooling. When I next saw you, I had it in my mind to relate the circumstances to you, but you will remember that just at that time you took it into your head to put an end to our intimacy. We had a few words, I think, and you were pleased to tell me that you disapproved of my habits of life, and that you intended we should henceforth be strangers. I was not in an amiable mood when I left you, and I resolved, on the first opportunity, to seek the woman you had brought to shame, and advise her to take such steps against you as would bring disgrace to your door. It would be paying you in your own coin, I thought. However, good fortune stood your friend at that time. My own difficulties or pleasures, or both combined, claimed my attention, and occupied me for many months. And when next I went to the village in which I had last seen your peasant sweetheart and your child, they were not to be found. I made inquiries, but could learn nothing of them, so I gave it up as a bad job, and forgot all about the matter. Since then very many years have passed, and I sank and sank, and you rose and rose. We did not meet again. But I confess, when I used to read accounts of your triumphs and your rising fame, that I would not have neglected an opportunity to have done you an ill turn had it been in my power. I was at the lowest ebb, everything was against me, and I was wondering how I should manage to extricate myself from the desperate position into which bad luck had driven me, when, not many weeks since, I met in the streets of Geneva 2 women. They were hawking nosegays, and the moment I set eyes upon the elder of these women, I recognised in her your old sweetheart from Zermatt. You appear to be faint. Shall I pause a while before I continue?" "No," said the Advocate, and he drank with feverish eagerness 2 glasses of wine. "Go on to the end." It was your sweetheart from Zermatt, and no other. And the younger of these women, one of the loveliest creatures I ever beheld, was known as Madeline, the flower girl." The Advocate, with a sudden movement, turned his chair, so that his face was hidden from Vanbrugh. "They were poor, and I was poor. If what I suspected, when I gazed at Madeline, was correct, I saw not only an opportunity for revenge upon you, but a certainty of being able to obtain money from you. The secret to such a man as you, married to a young and beautiful woman, was worth a fair sum, which I resolved should be divided between Pauline, that was the name adopted by the mother of your child, and myself. You cannot accuse me of want of frankness. I discovered where they lived. I had a secret speech with Pauline. My suspicion was no longer a suspicion, it was a fact. Madeline, the flower girl, was your daughter." He paused, but the Advocate made no movement, and did not speak. "How," continued Vanbrugh, "to turn that fact to advantage? How, and in what way, to make it worth a sum sufficiently large to satisfy me? That was what now occupied my thoughts. Madeline and her mother were even poorer than I supposed, and from Pauline's lips did I hear how anxious she was to remove her daughter from the temptations by which she was surrounded. In dealing with you, I knew it was necessary to be well prepared. You are a powerful antagonist to cope with, and one must have sure cards in his hand to have even a chance of winning any game he's playing with such a man as yourself. Pauline and I spoke frequently together, and gradually I unfolded to her the plan I had resolved upon. Without disclosing your name, I told her sufficiently to convince her that, by my aid, she might obtain a sum of money from the man who had wronged her, which would enable her to place herself and her daughter in a safer position, a position in which a girl as beautiful as Madeline would almost certainly meet with a lover of good social position whom she would marry, and with whom she would lead a happy life. Thus would she escape the snare into which she herself fell when she met you. This was the mother's dream. Satisfied that I could guide her to this end, Pauline signed an agreement, which is in my possession, by which she bound herself to pay me half the money she obtained from you in compensation for your wrong. Only one thing was to remain untouched by her and me, a sum which I resolved to obtain from you as a marriage portion for your daughter. Probably, under other circumstances, you would not have given me credit for so much consideration, but viewed in the light of the position in which you are placed, you may believe me. If you doubt it, I can show you the clause in black and white. This being settled between Pauline and me, I told her who you were, how rich you were, how famous you had grown, and how that you had lately married a young and beautiful woman. The affairs of a man as eminent as yourself are public property, and the newspapers delight in recording every particular, be it ever so trivial, connected with the lives of men of your rank. It was then necessary to ascertain what proof we held that you were the father of Madeline. Our visit to Zermatt could be proved. Her oath and mine, in connection with dates, would suffice. Then there would, in all likelihood, be living in Zermatt men and women whose testimony would be valuable. The great point was the birth of the child and the date, and to my discomfiture I learnt that Pauline had lost the certificate of her daughter's birth. But the record existed elsewhere, and it was to obtain a copy of this record, and to collect other evidence, that Pauline left her daughter. Her mission was a secret one, necessarily, and thus no person, not even Madeline, had any knowledge of its purport. What now remains to be told? Nothing that you do not know, except that when Pauline left her daughter for a few weeks, it was arranged that she and I should meet in Geneva on a certain date, to commence our plan of operations, and that I, having business elsewhere, was a couple of 100 miles away when Gautran murdered your hapless child. I arrived in Geneva on the last day of Gautran's trial, and on that evening, as you came out of the court house, I placed in your hands the letter asking you to give me an interview. I will say nothing of my feelings when I heard that you had successfully defended, and had set free, the murderer of your child. What I had to look after was myself and my own interest. And now you, who at the beginning of this interview rejected a renewal of the old friendship which existed between us, may probably inwardly acknowledge that had you accepted the hand I offered you, it is not I who would have been the gainer." Again he paused, and again, neither by word or movement, did the Advocate break the silence. "It will be as well," presently said Vanbrugh, "to recapitulate what I have to sell. First, the fact that you, a man of spotless character, so believed, deliberately betrayed a simple, innocent girl, and then deserted her. Inconceivable, the world would say, in such a man unless the proofs were incontestable. The proofs are incontestable. Next, the birth of your child, and your brutal pardon me, there is no other word to express it, and it is one which would be freely used negligence to ascertain whether your conduct had brought open shame and ruin upon the girl you betrayed. Next, the knowledge of the life of poverty and suffering led by the mother and the child, while you were in the possession of great wealth. Next, the murder of your child by a man whose name is uttered with execration. Next, your voluntary espousal of his cause, and your successful defence of a monster whom all men knew to be guilty of the foul crime. Next, your knowledge, at the time you defended him, that he was guilty of the murder of your own child. Next, in corroboration of this knowledge, the dying declaration of Gautran, solemnly sworn to and signed by him. A strong hand. No stronger has ever been held by any man's enemy, and until you came to my terms I am your enemy. If you refuse to purchase of me what I have to sell, the documents in my possession, and my sacred silence to the last day of my life upon the matters which affect you, and for such a sum as will make my future an easy one, I give you my word I will use my power against you, and will drag you down from the height upon which you stand. I cannot speak in more distinct terms. You can rescue me from poverty, I can rescue you from ignominy." The Advocate turned his face to Vanbrugh, who saw that, in the few minutes during which it had been hidden from his sight, it had assumed a hue of deadly whiteness. All the sternness had departed from it, and the cold, piercing eyes wavered as they looked first at Vanbrugh, then at the objects in the study. It was as though the Advocate were gazing, for the first time, upon the familiar things by which he was surrounded. Strange to say, this change in him seemed to make him more human, seemed to declare, "Stern and cold-hearted as I have appeared to the world, I am susceptible to tenderness." The mask had fallen from his face, and he stood now revealed, a man with human passions and human weaknesses, to whom a fatal sin in his younger days had brought a retribution as awful as it ever was the lot of a human being to suffer. There was something pitiable in this new presentment of a strong, earnest, self-confident nature, and even Vanbrugh was touched by it. During the last half hour the full force of the storm had burst over the House of White Shadows. The rain poured down with terrific power, and the thunder shook the building to its foundations. The Advocate listened with a singular and curious intentness to the terrible sounds, and when Vanbrugh remarked, "A fearful night," he smiled in reply. But it was the smile of a man whose heart was tortured to the extreme limits of human endurance. Once again he filled a glass with wine and raised it to his mouth, but as the liquor touched his lips he shuddered, and holding the glass upright in his hand, he turned it slowly over and poured it on the ground. Then, with much gentleness, "What has become of the woman you speak of as Pauline?" he asked. His very voice was changed. It was such as would proceed from one who had been prostrated by long and almost mortal sickness. "I do not know," replied Vanbrugh. "I have neither seen nor heard from her since the day before she left her daughter." "Say that I was disposed," said the Advocate, speaking very slowly and pausing occasionally, as though he was apprehensive that he would lose control of speech, "to purchase your silence. Do you think I should be safe in the event of her appearing on the scene? Would not her despair urge her to seek revenge upon the man who betrayed and deserted her, and who set her daughter's murderer free?" "It might be so, but at all events she would be ignorant of your knowledge of Gautran's guilt. This danger at least would be averted. The secret is ours at present, and ours only." "True. You believe that I knew Gautran to be guilty when I defended him?" "I am forced to believe it. Explain otherwise why you permitted him to visit you secretly in the dead of night, and why you filled his pockets with gold." "It cannot be explained. Yet what motive could I have had in setting him free?" "It is not for me to say. What I know, I know. I pretend to know nothing further." "Do you suppose I care for money?" As the Advocate asked the question, he opened a drawer in the escritoire and produced a roll of notes. "Take them. They are yours. But I do not purchase your silence with them. I give the money to you as a gift." "And I thank you for it. But I must have more." "Wait, wait! This story of yours has yet to be concluded." "Is it my fancy," said Vanbrugh, "or is it a real sound I hear? The ringing of a bell, and now a beating at the gates without, and a man's voice calling loudly?" Without hesitation the Advocate went from his study into the grounds. The fury of the storm made it difficult for him to keep his feet, but he succeeded in reaching the gate and opening it. A hand grasped his, and a man clung to him for support. The Advocate could not see the face of his visitor, nor, although he heard a voice speaking to him, did the words of the answer fall upon his ears. Staggering blindly through the grounds, they arrived at the door of the villa, and stumbled into the passage. There, by the aid of the rose lamp which hung in the hall, he distinguished the features of his visitor. It was Father Capel. "Have you come to see me?" asked the Advocate, "or are you seeking shelter from the storm?" "I have come to see you," replied Father Capel. "I hardly hoped to find you up, but perceived lights in your study windows, and they gave me confidence to make the attempt to speak with you. I have been beating at the gates for fully half an hour." He spoke in his usual gentle tones, and gazed at the Advocate's white face with a look of kindly and pitying penetration. "You are wet to the skin," said the Advocate. "I must find a change of clothing for you." "No, my son," said the priest, "I need none. It is not the storm without I dread, it is the storm within." As though desirous this remark should sink into the Advocate's heart, he paused a few moments before he spoke again. "I fear this storm of nature will do much harm. Trees are being uprooted and buildings thrown down. There is danger of a flood which may devastate the village, and bring misery to the poor. But there is a gracious God above us." He looked up reverently. "And if a man's conscience is clear, all is well." "There is a significance in the words you utter," said the Advocate, conducting the priest to his study, "which impresses me. Your mission is an important one." "Most important. It concerns the soul, not the body." "A friend of mine," said the Advocate, pointing to Vanbrugh, who was standing when they entered, "who has visited me to night for the first time for many years, on a mission as grave as yours. It was he who heard your voice at the gates." Father Capel inclined his head to Vanbrugh, who returned the courtesy. "I wish to confer with you privately," said the priest. "It will be best that we should be alone." "Nay," said the Advocate, "you may speak freely in his presence. I have but one secret from him and all men. I beg you to proceed." Section 32